1. Opening cold kills from the ground up. Not from the sky. Cold does not announce itself with roaring storms or cinematic blizzards. It kills quietly, patiently, starting not from the air around you, but from the frozen ground beneath your feet. In the first 15 seconds of this story, you must understand the truth that modern builders still overlook. The Vikings beat winter not with endless firewood, not with massive hearths blazing all night, but with a hidden form of engineering buried beneath every longhouse floor. They built a living, breathing thermal machine under their own footsteps, a system so effective that modern homes still struggle to match it. Now imagine Scandinavia in midwinter. The wind cuts like a blade. Snow drifts pile higher than a man's chest, and the earth itself turns to stone. Temperatures plunge so low that your breath freezes as it leaves your mouth. In these conditions, most civilizations looked upward, toward the roof and the walls, believing that the air would be their greatest enemy. But the Vikings noticed something different. They learned that the ground steals heat faster than any winter gale ever could. It pulls warmth from your bones silently through contact, draining life hour after hour. Where others fought the cold with more fire, the Vikings aimed at the root of the problem. They attacked the ground itself, turning their floors into a shield, a buffer, and finally, a passive heater that worked long after the flames died down. Their survival did not depend on burning more fuel. It depended on understanding nature's rules so deeply that they could bend them. And that single insight changed everything. 2. The forgotten threat. Modern humans ignore the ground beneath them today. When we speak of insulation, we speak of roofs packed with fiberglass, walls stuffed with foam, and windows sealed tightly against drafts. We obsess over the parts of the house we can see, reinforcing what feels obvious. But physics tells a different story. In cold climates, as much as 70% of heat loss doesn't come from the roof or the walls. It comes from the ground. Our modern floors, concrete slabs, tiled surfaces, polished stone, are perfect cold sinks. They collect moisture, hold winter chill, and siphon heat from the body every time we stand, sit, or sleep. We have engineered comfort into every direction except the one that matters most. The Vikings, however, didn't need scientific formulas to understand this. They lived with the consequences. Sleeping on damp earth meant waking up weaker every morning. It meant sick children, exhausted adults, and settlements that could not endure long winters. So the question becomes unavoidable. How did a people living more than 1,000 years ago understand a core principle of thermal physics that our own society routinely forgets? And why did they decide that the path to survival began underfoot, where no one else bothered to look? 3. The Viking engineer's mind, ancient environmental design. In its purest form, the Vikings are often portrayed as raiders, warriors, and conquerors. But this is only part of the truth. In their daily lives, they were pragmatic engineers, forced into creativity by the brutal landscapes of Skagafjord, Lofoten, Hedeby, and the frozen North Atlantic frontier. These were places where resources were limited. Winters were long, and mistakes were deadly. Survival required not brute strength, but precision, observation, and a willingness to let nature guide the design process. Instead of fighting the environment, they worked with it. They recognized the patterns of frost, the behavior of moisture, the slow breathing of the earth as it froze and thawed through the seasons. They learned that the most reliable form of heat was not the flame that blazed bright and vanished, but the warmth stored slowly inside the materials beneath their home. This mindset, of adapting to nature rather than resisting it, laid the foundation for the floor system that allowed Viking families to live, work, and sleep through the harshest winters in Europe. Their longhouses were not just shelters. They were finely tuned machines built from wood, stone, straw, and earth. Each layer had a purpose. Each decision sprang from experience, not guesswork. And the result was one of the most quietly brilliant thermal systems of the ancient world. A forgotten technology that modern survivalists, builders, and engineers are only beginning to rediscover. Number 4. Step 1. Raising the floor, breaking contact with the earth. A Viking longhouse never sat directly on the frozen ground. Instead, its floor was lifted just enough, 10 to 40 centimeters depending on the region, to make all the difference between a home that preserved life and a shelter that slowly drained it away. This was not a high stilt house like those found in Southeast Asia. It was what modern architects might call a floating floor, a deliberate separation designed to interrupt the invisible assault from below. When you raise a floor even a hand's width above the soil, something remarkable happens. You sever the pathway through which cold and moisture travel. In physics, this is called breaking the conductive bridge. In daily life, it means your body no longer surrenders precious heat to the earth. At the same time, you cut off capillary moisture, the slow, steady rise of dampness that can chill a room even without visible water. By lifting the floor, the Vikings created a natural buffer zone, a pocket of air that stayed drier, warmer, and far more stable than the world outside. Interestingly, this wasn't a unique idea. Traditional Japanese homes built in the Shoin-zukuri style also raised their floors to control moisture and maintain a steady indoor climate. Different cultures, different landscapes, but the same truth. If you want to survive the cold, you start by making sure the ground cannot touch you. For the Vikings, this was only the beginning of their thermal design. 5. Step 2. The mineral foundation, sand, gravel, and the power of heated stone beneath every Viking floor lay a mineral system that functioned like a silent engine. It began with gravel, the unsung hero of the North. Loose, porous, and naturally draining, gravel allowed meltwater and ground moisture to escape downward rather than seep upward. This prevented the soil beneath the home from freezing into a block of ice and turning the entire structure into a cold sink. On top of this came a leveling layer of sand, simple, stable, and incredibly effective at distributing heat without trapping water. But the most extraordinary element of all was the stone. The Vikings carefully selected granite and gabbro, rocks with unusually high thermal capacity. These stones could absorb heat slowly during the day or from the hearth's flames, and then release it evenly through the night. The longhouse floor became, in effect, a primitive thermal battery, charging itself while the fire burned and discharging gently while the family slept. Archaeology confirms this was not accidental. At Borgund Kopang in Norway, excavations revealed stones with clear signs of thermal shock, meaning they had been repeatedly heated and cooled in a controlled environment. In Jorvik, modern-day York, researchers found thin layers of ash beneath subfloor stones, evidence that heated rocks had been placed there to radiate warmth. And at Ribe in Denmark, the foundations contained stones permanently stained a deep reddish hue, classic markers of long-term exposure to heat. These discoveries tell a consistent story. The Viking floor wasn't decoration. It wasn't rustic charm. It was engineered with precision to warm a home long after the fire died, using the physics of slow heating and slow cooling to create a reliable signature. 6. Step 3. The organic layer, straw, reed, raw wool, and the art of seasonal adjustment above the stone and sand came the materials that brought the system to life. Organic fibers chosen not for their beauty, but for their remarkable thermal properties. Straw, with its hollow stems and naturally trapped air pockets, formed an excellent insulation layer. It slowed heat transfer, added softness underfoot, and provided the house with a gentle, breathable barrier. Reeds and rushes, harvested from coastal marshes and northern wetlands, contributed a different strength, exceptional moisture resistance, Their waxy surfaces shed dampness, keeping the layer beneath the wood planks dry and mold-free even in the wettest months. Raw wool appeared less frequently, but when it did, it offered unmatched warmth. Icelandic sagas mention wool used under bedding platforms, and for good reason. Wool insulates even when damp and resists decay far better than most natural fibers. All these materials shared one crucial trait. They breathed. They did not trap moisture. They let it move, preventing the deadly accumulation of cold, wet air beneath the living space. What made the Viking system even more impressive was its seasonal adaptability. In winter, families thickened the organic layer, doubling the amount of straw to build a denser blanket of insulation. In summer, they removed a portion of it to let the floor ventilate, keeping the house cool and preventing humidity from becoming trapped. This was modular insulation, a concept almost entirely absent in modern building design, yet incredibly effective in the changing northern climate. Finally, many Scandinavian households completed the floor with a coarse woven cloth, crafted by women who understood exactly how to reinforce the system. This simple textile added warmth, protected the straw from constant foot traffic, and extended the lifespan of the organic layer beneath. It was a small detail, one easy to overlook, but it was part of a larger pattern. Every layer, every material, every adjustment served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Together, these fibers formed the heart of a floor that did far more than support a home. It insulated, regulated moisture, adapted to the seasons, and turned ancient living spaces into warm refuges strong enough to withstand some of the harshest winters on Earth. 7. Step 4. The thin wooden planks. The breathing system of the house above the layers of stone and straw lay the final element of the Viking floor. A surface of thin wooden planks. At first glance, it might seem fragile, even unfinished, compared to the thick lumber we expect in modern houses. But this thinness was intentional. The Vikings understood that wood needed to move. Seasons in the north swing violently between dampness and dryness, freezing and thawing. A rigid floor would crack, warp, or trap moisture, but a flexible one could bend with the climate. These planks allowed the entire floor system to breathe. Moist air could rise and escape instead of being trapped below, which meant the organic layers, straw, reed, wool, were far less likely to rot. The wood itself, usually spruce or pine grown slowly in the Nordic cold, had unusually dense fibers. This made it naturally resistant to temperature loss and far better at retaining warmth than many modern materials. More importantly, this wooden layer completed a dynamic system. The floor was not a static construction sealed off from nature. It was a living interface, always adjusting, expanding, contracting, and venting. The Vikings designed it to work with the environment rather than fight it, allowing the entire structure to remain stable, warm, and dry during the harshest seasons. In a world where the cold was relentless, the floor's ability to breathe was not a luxury. It was the reason it survived. 8. Synergy. When the floor, walls, and turf roof form a closed thermal engine, to truly understand Viking engineering, you have to see their homes not as separate parts, but as a single integrated organism. The floor, the walls, and the roof worked together to trap heat, store it, and release it slowly, creating a passive heating system long before the term existed. Start with the roof. Viking longhouses often used turf roofs, thick layers of earth, grasses, and intertwined root systems piled 30 to 70 centimeters deep. This wasn't primitive construction. It was insulation on a massive scale. The turf absorbed heat during the day, resisted freezing winds, and sealed the warm air inside. As the upper layers held warmth, the air beneath them naturally pressed downward, concentrating heat near the floor where the family slept. Then there were the walls. Carved from slow-grown pine and spruce, their growth rings packed tightly together. These timbers acted as natural thermal barriers. They didn't leak warmth the way lighter woods or modern synthetic walls do. Instead, they held it in place, preventing rapid temperature swings and stabilizing the indoor climate. When combined with the layered floor, something remarkable happened. The hearth heated the stones. The stones heated the floor. The floor released warmth into the lower air, and the turf roof trapped that warm air, keeping it from rising and disappearing into the winter night. Everything worked in harmony. Even after the fire burned out at midnight, the home remained warm enough for life to continue in comfort. This was not a coincidence. It was an ecosystem, a passive heating engine powered by stone, wood, soil, and air. 9. A winter night inside a Viking longhouse. Picture this. Outside, the Arctic wind lashes across the valley, dragging the temperature down to 25 degrees below zero. Snow piles thick on the turf roof, muffling every sound except the low growl of the storm. Inside the longhouse, the hearth's flames have faded to glowing embers. The family has let it burn out deliberately to save precious firewood. Yet the room does not fall into darkness or bitter cold. Warmth lingers near the floor. Children curl up close to it, wrapped in wool blankets, their breath soft and slow. Their mother quietly adjusts the straw layer beneath a sleeping platform, spreading it with practiced hands to keep the warmth even. A faint, comforting heat rises still from the stones warmed earlier in the evening. They radiate their energy upward in a slow, steady pulse, like the heartbeat of the house itself. The floor remains warmer than the air above it, a quiet contradiction that modern thermodynamics fully supports, but most people would never expect. The family sleeps peacefully, surrounded by the protective architecture of their ancestors. Outside, winter continues its assault, carving ice along the edges of the world. But inside, all is calm. The longhouse breathes. The floor holds the night at bay. And in this small pocket of warmth, life endures exactly as it has for generations. 10. Archaeological evidence. The Vikings were not guessing. They were engineering for centuries. People assumed the Viking floor was nothing more than rustic improvisation. But archaeology tells a very different story. Across northern Europe, excavations consistently reveal that this layered floor system was not an accident, not a regional quirk, and certainly not a lucky discovery. It was a standardized method, refined over generations and passed down like any other essential skill. In Jorvik, modern-day York, excavations uncovered unmistakable signs of multi-layered Viking floors. Beneath compacted earth and worn wooden planks lay thin traces of carbonized straw and ash, the signature of a heated stone system used repeatedly over many years. These layers were not random. They were deliberately arranged and rebuilt as families replaced materials season after season. Farther north, at Longhouse in Norway, researchers reconstructed an entire longhouse using Viking-era techniques. When they lived in it through the winter, the results were astonishing. Even after the hearth fire was allowed to burn out, the indoor temperature remained far more stable than in modern wooden cabins of the same size. The layered floor held the heat exactly as described in sagas and oral histories. In Ribe, Denmark's oldest town, archaeologists found heavily compacted flooring, layer upon layer of gravel, organic fiber, and smoothed earth, evidence of continuous use and ongoing maintenance. These were not temporary shelters. They were engineered living spaces designed to last for generations. And in Iceland, turf houses built on the same principles continued to be used all the way into the 20th century. Their floors followed nearly identical construction patterns: raised foundations, mineral sublayers, organic insulation, breathable wood. The technique survived simply because it worked. Together, these findings paint a clear picture. The Viking floor was not a survival hack or a clever trick. It was a formalized system, tested by climate, validated by archaeology, and preserved through culture. This was environmental engineering practiced long before the term existed. 11. The failure of modern architecture, where the Vikings still outperform us as impressive as Viking engineering is, what makes it even more striking is how easily modern architecture ignores the very principles that kept ancient northern families alive. In our pursuit of convenience, we often build homes that look strong on paper but perform disastrously in winter conditions. The worst offender is the concrete slab. Concrete is a highly conductive material. It drains heat from the human body far faster than stone or wood. A modern home with a concrete floor is essentially sitting on an enormous cold plate. And because concrete cannot breathe, it traps moisture. This moisture grows colder, condenses, and creates mold, leaving the house clammy and uncomfortable even when the thermostat reads warm. In cold climates, it's a fundamental design mistake. Then there is the moisture barrier problem. Many homes place vapor barriers on the wrong side of the floor assembly, causing moisture to become trapped inside the structure. When warm indoor air meets a cold layer within the floor, it condenses, creating what builders call cold condensation. The Vikings never faced this issue because their floors were breathable, flexible, and never sealed tight enough to trap water. Modern insulation also reveals a blind spot. Most of our methods focus on horizontal insulation, walls and ceilings, while ignoring the vertical direction, where the majority of heat loss actually occurs. The Vikings, through experience, optimized their homes against vertical heat drain, the most dangerous form of thermal loss in a winter landscape. Ultimately, the Viking floor wins because of its simplicity and adaptability. It does not trap moisture. It does not rot from within. It does not suffocate the home or force artificial climate control. It balances heat, breathes with the seasons, and maintains stability using natural materials that require almost no maintenance. It is a perfect example of sustainable design born from necessity, crafted by people who understood the land better than we do today. 12. Real-world applications. How to rebuild this system for survival and cabin living. What makes the Viking floor truly remarkable is that its principles are not locked in the past. You can recreate this system today with basic tools and inexpensive materials, and in many cases, it will outperform modern flooring in cold, remote environments. Start with elevation. Raise your floor slightly above the ground to interrupt heat transfer and stop capillary moisture. Just 10 or 15 centimeters can shift the entire thermal balance of a small structure. Once raised, lay down a 15 to 20 centimeter layer of gravel. This ensures excellent drainage and prevents ice formation beneath your shelter. Add a leveling layer of sand on top to distribute heat evenly and create a firm base. Next comes the organic layer. Spread straw or hay to create natural insulation. If you have access to reeds or dried grasses, mix them in for better moisture control. In colder regions, raw wool can be added for exceptional warmth. Seal this with thin wooden planks. Not thick, airtight boards, but breathable ones that allow moisture to rise and escape. This breathing floor will stay dry, warm, and surprisingly resilient. For additional heating, you can incorporate solar-heated stones. Warm, dark stones in direct sunlight during the day or near a controlled fire. Then place them beneath a raised platform or within the subfloor layers. They will release heat slowly through the night, just as they did for Viking families 1,000 years ago. For survival shelters, especially bug-out structures, the advantages are profound. A floor that stays warm without constant fire means you can reduce smoke output, avoid revealing your location, and conserve fuel. For off-grid cabins in the mountains or forests of North America, you can pair the Viking floor with a modern rocket mass heater to create a hybrid system that is both efficient and astonishingly fuel-saving. And remember this, using natural materials keeps maintenance simple. Gravel does not rot. Straw can be replaced seasonally. Wood breathes. Stone never fails. The Viking floor stands as one of history's quiet triumphs, a reminder that sometimes the best engineering solutions are the ones humanity figured out long before blueprints and building codes ever existed. 13. Viking culture. When engineering becomes a living heritage for the Vikings, the layered floor was never just a construction technique. It was a tradition, a responsibility, and a piece of cultural knowledge passed carefully from one generation to the next. Every year, as the seasons shifted and the long northern nights approached, families rebuilt parts of their floors. Children watched their parents lift worn planks, replace straw, add new reeds, and level the sand beneath. These weren't chores. They were lessons in survival. The knowledge of how to insulate a home, how to manage moisture, how to store heat in stone and release it slowly, became part of the fabric of Viking life. Their engineering was embedded in daily ritual, woven into stories and practice, shaping how each home prepared for winter. It was this continuity, this disciplined understanding of nature and energy, that allowed them to remain in regions where other civilizations could not endure. In lands where cold could kill the unprepared within hours, the Vikings thrived for centuries. Their mastery of the ground beneath their feet kept their families warm, healthy, and resilient. It wasn't brute strength or constant fire that sustained their settlements. It was knowledge, quiet, practical, and inherited, turning their homes into sanctuaries of warmth amid the unforgiving northern world. 14. Conclusion. Lessons that still hold power after 1,000 years. What kept Viking families alive was not advanced technology or endless resources. It was the ability to see danger where others saw none, and to solve it with patience, intuition, and a deep respect for nature's rules. Their floors, those humble layers of gravel, straw, and wood, stand as a reminder that the key to survival is often found not in what we build upward, but in what we build underfoot. Modern societies overlook the ground beneath their homes, trusting concrete and insulation while ignoring the physics of heat loss. Yet 1,000 years ago, the Vikings solved this problem with materials anyone could gather and principles anyone can still apply. The fact that their designs remain effective today is not coincidence. It is proof that ancient engineering can outlast entire eras of innovation. So as you reflect on the hidden brilliance of the Viking floor, consider what other lessons lie buried in the past, waiting to be rediscovered. And if this journey into forgotten engineering has sharpened your understanding of how humans once mastered the elements, make sure you subscribe to Historia Prime. Together, we will continue exploring the ancient wisdom that still outperforms modern thinking, one forgotten innovation at a time.